You are listening on the Velvet Audio Stories channel.
Chapter 1. Wedding with the Devil. The church was drowning in the scent of white roses. Candlelight flickered along the aisle. A piano played a soft, haunting wedding march. To the world, this was a perfect wedding. But to me, it was nothing more than a transaction. I stood at the end of the aisle, weighed down by a lace gown I hadn't chosen. My hands were ice cold. Not from nerves, but from pure, unadulterated hatred. At the altar stood the man I was forced to marry. Adrian Volkov, the name the whole city whispered in shadows. The Bratva kingpin, the most powerful man in the underworld. And the man I believed had murdered my father. He stood tall in a flawless black suit. Towering, cold, eyes as dark as the abyss. No smile, no groom's tenderness. He looked less like a husband and more like a king. A king waiting to claim what was rightfully his. My life. The music swelled. A hand pressed lightly against my back, nudging me forward. Step by step, one agonizing inch at a time. I walked past rows of guests. No one dared to meet my gaze. Perhaps they knew, perhaps they understood. This wasn't love, this was a sacrifice. As I reached the altar, Adrian Volkov finally locked eyes with me. A shiver raced down my spine. Not from disgust, not from rage, but because he was studying me, like a predator analyzing its prey. The priest began the liturgy. Words of love, of fidelity, of happily ever after. It all sounded like a sick joke in this room. There was no love here, only power and fear. Finally, the priest turned to Adrian. Adrian Volkov, do you take Lena Carter to be your wedded wife? Without a second's hesitation, his voice was deep, steady, and chilling. I do. 2 short words, but they sounded like a death sentence being handed down. The priest turned to me. Lena Carter, do you take Adrian Volkov to be your wedded husband? The church fell into a suffocating silence. I could feel 100 pairs of eyes boring into me. For a split second, I truly wanted to say, no. To turn my back, to run, to burn it all down. But then I saw my uncle in the front row. His gaze was sharp, a warning. My father was dead, and if I refused this union, someone else would be next. My throat went dry, but in the end, the words came out. I do. The priest smiled. He had no idea he had just finalized a deal with the devil. The groom may kiss the bride. Adrian stepped closer. Slow, deliberate. He towered over me, his shadow swallowing me like a storm. He leaned in, too close, close enough that only I could hear. His voice was a low, smoky rasp. You hate me. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. I looked him dead in the eye. Yes, a flash of something, amusement, perhaps, flickered in his dark gaze. Good. His breath ghosted over my ear. Hate keeps people alive much longer. Then, he kissed me. The church erupted in applause. The sound was deafening, but I heard nothing, because in my head, there was only one thought. I had just married the most dangerous man in the city. And worse, I had the feeling he'd been waiting for this day for a very long time. Chapter 2. The Devil's Den. The black Rolls-Royce pulled away from the church in a heavy, suffocating silence. No laughter, no cheers, no wedding playlist, only the low hum of the engine and the frantic thud of my heart against my ribs. I sat in the back, my fingers digging into the layers of my wedding gown. The pristine white lace felt like a lie I was forced to wear. Beside me sat Adrian Volkov, my husband. Only minutes ago, the priest had declared us one. My mind still refused to wrap itself around the reality of it. Adrian leaned back against the leather, his posture so relaxed it was infuriating. A flawless black suit, his shirt collar unbuttoned at the throat. He was scrolling through his phone as if the ceremony had been nothing more than a routine board meeting. Notifications flashed incessantly. His replies were clipped. 3 words. 2 words. Sometimes just one. But it wasn't the messages that caught my attention. It was the speed of the replies from the other side. Instant, bordering on frantic. They feared him. The whole city feared him. And me, I had to live with him. The car glided through familiar streets. Places I had passed 100 times before. The corner cafe. The park where my father used to take me for walks. Everything looked the same. Yet, my life was unrecognizable. Finally, I shattered the silence. You killed my father. My voice was ice. Adrian didn't look up. No. A single word. Flat. As if I'd simply asked him if it was going to rain. I ground my teeth. Don't lie to me. This time, he looked up. His dark, bottomless eyes locked onto mine. No flinching, no anger, just observation. If I had killed him, he said slowly, you wouldn't be alive to ask that question. I went rigid. The statement was terrifying, but what scared me more was, I knew he wasn't lying. The car veered off the main road, entering a private drive. 2 rows of towering trees stood like soldiers on guard. At the end of the path sat a massive wrought iron gate. 10 feet high, thick, heavy bars, security cameras mounted everywhere. 2 men in suits stood guard, earpieces in place, glares icy. They spotted the car and the gates swung open instantly. The Rolls-Royce rolled inside. I stared out the window, nearly forgetting to breathe. Before me stood a sprawling estate. No, mansion wasn't enough. It was a fortress. Great walls of white stone. Sweeping balconies. Classical columns. A massive reflecting pool out front shimmered under gold floodlights. The entire place screamed one thing: power. I turned to Adrian. You live here? He glanced out the window. Yes. That was it. No boasting. No explanation. As if living in a palace like this was as natural as breathing. The car came to a halt at the grand entrance. An elderly butler stepped forward to open the door. Silver hair. A crisp suit. Welcome home, Mr. Volkov. He bowed his head, then looked at me. Welcome, Mrs. Volkov. I hated the way he said it. Mrs. Volkov. It sounded like a cruel joke. Adrian stepped out first, then turned back. He held out a hand. A gesture of perfect, practiced chivalry. I ignored it. I climbed out on my own, my heels clicking against the cold stone. Adrian watched me, a moment of silence hanging between us. Then, a faint ghost of a smirk. As if I had just done something amusing. We entered the foyer. The massive oak doors opened to an interior that stole my breath. Marble floors. A gargantuan crystal chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Classic oil paintings. A winding staircase that spiraled toward the second floor. The place was so beautiful it felt surreal. But it lacked one thing. Warmth. This wasn't a home. It was a temple of authority. Adrian began to climb the stairs, never checking to see if I was following. But I knew I had no choice. We reached the second floor,
Let me
a
go!
long hallway
You can't
lined with
escape
closed
this.
doors.
Please, I beg
Finally,
you.
It's
Adrian
too
stopped
late.
before a set of grand double doors. He pushed them open. Inside was a bedroom the size of an apartment. Floor-to-ceiling glass doors. A balcony overlooking the rear gardens. A massive bed sat in the center, large enough for 4 people. I stood frozen. Adrian rested a hand on the back of a chair. You stay here from now on. I turned to him. And you? Also here. I looked at the bed. Then back at him. No. Adrian tilted his head slightly. No, I'm not sleeping with you. A thin smile played on his lips. You think I married you for that? He stepped closer. Slow, deliberate strides until the space between us was less than an arm's length. He towered over me, his presence like a silent storm. I can have any woman I want, he said. His voice was low. Calm. You're not that special, sunshine. I bristled. Don't call me that. Sunshine? Yes. I hated the way he spat the word, like he was mocking me. Adrian held my gaze for a few beats, then let out a dry chuckle. I think I like it. He turned away, heading for the door. Bathroom is to the left. I stayed rooted to the spot. He paused before stepping out. And Lena. I didn't answer. Don't try to run. I crossed my arms. Why? You afraid you'll lose your prize? Adrian turned his head, his gaze darkening. Because outside these walls, he paused for a heartbeat. You'll be dead before you clear the first block. He left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood alone in the cavernous space. Silence rushed back in. I stepped out onto the balcony. The night wind was biting. From here, I could see the entire perimeter. The high fences, the security lights, the patrolling guards. A true fortress. I gripped the railing. I'm going to run, I whispered to the dark. Even if I have to tear this cage apart. But deep down, I remembered the look in Adrian's eyes when he said those words. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It was just a cold, hard truth. Out there, something was more dangerous than him. And I still had no idea what it was. Chapter 3. The Cage. My first night in the Volkov estate, I barely slept. It wasn't because the bed was too large. It wasn't because the room was unfamiliar. It was the truth weighing heavy in my mind. I had married Adrian Volkov, the most dangerous man in the city. And now, I was in his home. No, not a home, a cage. I lay there, staring at the ceiling in the dark. Weak slivers of light from the garden filtered through the curtains. Everything was so quiet I could hear the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. But the quieter it got, the more suffocating it felt. I sat up, throwing the covers aside. I paced out onto the balcony. The night air was biting. From this height, the Volkov grounds looked like a fortress. High iron fences, security lights sweeping across the lawn. I spotted 2 guards on patrol below. Their voices murmured low over their radios. I turned back to look at the room. The gargantuan bed, the closet filled with pristine, expensive clothes. Jewelry gleaming on the vanity. It was all foreign, all a beautifully decorated trap. I clenched my fists. No, I whispered. I won't stay here. The thought sharpened with every passing minute. If I stayed, I'd get used to this place. I'd get used to Adrian. I'd forget that he was the enemy. I couldn't let that happen. I stripped off my nightgown and pulled on something simple. A dark sweater, jeans, sneakers. I tied my hair back tight. I checked the clock. 2 a.m., the perfect window. Most of the house would be asleep. I eased the door open. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows. Empty. I stepped out. Adrian's door sat at the far end of the hall. Closed tight. I paused for a heartbeat, my pulse racing, then kept moving. I crept down the stairs, the cold stone biting at my feet. I made every step as silent as a ghost's. The back exit was to the right. I'd noted it during my walk earlier that afternoon. A heavy oak door, but it wasn't deadbolted from the inside. I gripped the handle, took a deep breath, and pulled. The door swung open silently. The night air rushed in. Freedom. I stepped out, shivering as the wind hit me. But even the cold felt better than being inside that house. I hurried through the garden, past the pool. The water shimmered under the moon like liquid silver. In the distance sat the side gate. If I could make it past that, I'd be on the open road. I picked up the pace. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Just a few more steps. My hand was inches from the latch. You move fast. The voice from behind made the blood in my veins turn to ice. I whirled around. Adrian Volkov stood a few yards away. Black dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, no coat. He didn't look like a man who had just been woken up. He looked like he'd been waiting. 2 guards stood behind him, silent as shadows. I balled my hands into fists. You're stalking me. Adrian shook his head. I guessed you'd try this. He walked toward me. Slow. Deliberate. He didn't look worried that I would bolt. I scanned the perimeter. No exit. I looked back at him. Defiant. Then kill me. The guards behind him shifted, surprised. But Adrian's expression didn't flicker. Why? Because I won't live in your cage. Adrian stopped right in front of me. The distance between us vanished. He leaned down just enough to lock his eyes onto mine. This isn't a cage. I let out a cold laugh. Then what is it? The only place in the world where you'll stay alive. I scoffed. You think I'm an idiot? Adrian was silent for a few seconds. Then he glanced at his men. Go. They disappeared instantly. Now it was just him and me. Adrian crossed his arms. Run. I frowned. What? You wanted freedom. He tilted his head toward the gate. The gate's unlocked. I looked at the gate. Then at him. What game are you playing? No game, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I'm just curious to see how far you'd get. I didn't trust him. But the gate. It really was open. I brushed past him. He didn't stop me. I reached the gate. Just a few steps more. Freedom. I reached for the latch, ready to throw it open. Lena. Adrian's voice drifted from behind me. I turned back. He hadn't moved an inch. His eyes were as dark as the night itself. Before you decide, he said slowly, there's something you should know. I narrowed my eyes. What? Your father owed a lot of people. I stiffened. You're lying. I wish I were. He took a single step forward. After he died, those people started looking for you. My heart skipped a beat. No, I've been holding them back. You expect me to believe that? Adrian watched me for a moment, then pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and held it up. An image appeared. I stepped closer, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me. A candid shot. In front of a cafe. Outside my university. At the grocery store. I had never seen these photos. But one thing was clear. Someone had been watching me for a long time. Adrian looked at me. You think I'm the monster in your story, he said. But out there, he pointed toward the gate. There are real monsters. The night wind howled. I looked out at the pitch-black road beyond the gate. For the first time, I felt a real, paralyzing fear. Not of Adrian, but of the shadows searching for me. Adrian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low rasp. "You can go," he said. "I won't stop you." I looked at him. "And if I stay? Then you are under my protection." I swallowed hard. "Why would you do this?" A beat of silence passed. Then Adrian spoke. "Because you're my wife." Those 4 words made me shiver. Not from tenderness, but because of the way he said them. Like an unchangeable fact of the universe. I took one last look at the gate. The road out there was hollow. No lights. No people. No safety. I turned back. I walked past Adrian, heading toward the mansion. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked beside me. As we climbed the front steps, I heard him murmur behind me, "Good girl." Chapter 4. Blood on his hands. After that night, I wasn't sure I understood Adrian Volkov anymore. I used to think he was just a cold-blooded mafia kingpin. A monster in a bespoke suit. But those photos on his phone, they'd shattered everything. Someone had been watching me. For months. Maybe longer. The thought was a parasite that kept me from sleep. 3 days into the marriage, I still felt like I was drifting through a fever dream. A luxury dream, but freezing. Mornings at the Volkov estate were eerily quiet. The butler brought breakfast to my room. Black coffee, toast, fruit, everything was perfect. But I didn't feel alive. I felt like I was existing. Adrian usually left the house before dawn. Some days, I only saw him for a few fleeting minutes. He was a man of few words. But whenever he walked in, the room shifted. People grew quieter, careful, like the air changed when a predator entered the room. That evening, the rain arrived. Drops drummed against the glass of the balcony doors. I was reading on the sofa when I heard it. A heavy thud. From downstairs. Then a scream. Not a scream of anger. A scream of agony. I set my book down. Listened. Footsteps. The sound of someone begging. A cold dread crept up my spine. I stepped out into the hallway. The amber lights were dim. The house was so massive that at night, it felt like a labyrinth. The sound came again. From the basement. I knew I should go back to my room. But curiosity pulled me forward like a tether. I descended the stairs. Slowly. Each step calculated. The scream was clearer now. I swear, I didn't. A man's voice. Trembling. I stopped in front of the basement door. It was cracked open. A sliver of harsh white light spilled out. I pushed it, just an inch. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. A wide room. Concrete walls. In the center sat a metal chair. A man was strapped to it. Hands bound behind his back. Face masked in blood. Clothes shredded. And standing before him was Adrian. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the cuffs. Sleeves rolled up to his forearms. On a table beside him lay a knife. And a handgun. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. "Please," the man groaned. "I don't know." Adrian stood over him. Calm. Too calm. Like a surgeon waiting for a patient to tell the truth. "You don't know?" Adrian repeated. His voice was low. Not loud, but enough to chill the marrow in my bones. I swear." The man was sobbing now. "I don't know who's behind it." Adrian tilted his head, studying him. His gaze was dead. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" He picked up the knife from the table. "No rush. No rage. Just business. You've worked for me for 6 years," Adrian said. "And now money is vanishing from my accounts." The man shook violently. "I didn't." Adrian slammed the knife into the table. The crack of metal against wood made me jump. "I'm going to ask one last time." He leaned down. Eye level with the man. "Who hired you?" The man broke into jagged sobs. I don't have a name." Adrian watched him. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then he straightened up. He let out a slow breath. As if he'd simply run out of patience. "Unfortunate." He turned to a guard. "Handle it." The man shrieked. "No, please." Crack. The gunshot was dry. Short. The man slumped forward. Everything went silent. Only the rain tapping against the high basement windows remained. I stood frozen at the door. Adrian turned. His gaze locked onto mine. No surprise. No shame. Just a look. "You shouldn't be down here." His voice was as steady as if we were talking in the parlor. I was shaking. You just killed him." Adrian wiped his hands with a white cloth offered by a guard. "Yes." No justification. No explanation. Just an admission. I looked at the body. My throat felt like it was filled with sand. "You're a monster." Adrian paused. He looked at me. No anger. No reaction. Just thought. "Maybe," he said. I never claimed to be a good man. I stepped into the room, my legs trembling. You killed him like he was an insect. Adrian followed my gaze to the corpse, then turned back to me. You wanted me to spare him? I wanted you not to murder. My voice echoed against the concrete walls. Adrian walked toward me, slowly. Lena, his voice was a low rasp. Your world, and my world are not the same. There is no world where murder is necessary. Yes, there is. One word. Short. Cold. He stopped right in front of me. Close enough that I could smell the gunpowder. If I hadn't killed him. Adrian looked me dead in the eye. He would have killed you. I froze. What? Adrian glanced at the guard. Show her. The guard pulled up a phone. A video clip played. Security footage. The man who had just died. He was talking to two strangers. One of them handed him an envelope. The audio crackled through. We want the girl. My heart stopped. Lena Carter, get her out of the Volkov estate. We'll handle the rest. The video cut to black. I stood paralyzed. Speechless. Adrian looked at me, his eyes dark as the abyss. Do you understand now? I whispered. What do they want with me? Adrian didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. That's exactly what I'm trying to find out. The room fell silent. The rain continued its assault outside. Adrian turned away, barking an order to the guards to clean up. As if he'd just finished a day at the office. I stayed rooted to the spot. My mind was a chaotic mess. Before stepping out, Adrian paused. He looked back at me. His gaze was deep, dangerous. You still think I'm a monster, he said. I don't care. He took a single step toward me. His voice was low, almost a whisper. But remember one thing. I looked at him. Adrian spoke slowly. I might be the monster you fear. A pause. But I'm also the only monster standing between you and hell. I couldn't find the words to respond. Adrian turned his back and left the room, leaving me standing in the scent of gunpowder. And a terrifying truth. I had seen the darkest side of Adrian Volkov. But what chilled me to the bone was, he might be right. Out there were things much more dangerous than him.
Is Adrian a protector or a predator? Comment devil! If you think Lena should run while she still can, subscribe for part 2. Welcome to Velvet Audio Stories, a brain-hacking IQ challenge.
Chapter 5. The Price of Protection. That night, the Volkov estate was plunged into an unnatural silence. After what I'd witnessed in the basement, my mind refused to settle. The image of the man being executed. The acrid scent of gunpowder. The glacial look in Adrian's eyes. It played on a loop, a broken film in my head. I stood by the balcony glass, staring into the blackened garden. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy, bloated with clouds. As if another storm, a different kind of storm, was brewing. I wondered if Adrian ever slept, or if things like guilt simply didn't exist in his world. Then, it happened. A massive explosion rocked the house. The windows rattled in their frames. My heart leapt into my throat. Suddenly, the alarm blared, a piercing shriek that shattered the night. Shouted orders, the static of radios, the frantic thud of boots on hardwood. Before I could process it, my bedroom door burst open. Adrian stepped in, black shirt, disheveled hair, but his eyes were sharp, lethal, and entirely sober. Get behind me. His voice was clipped, a command that brooked no argument. What's happening? I managed to ask. We're under fire. 2 words, but they turned the air in the room to lead. Adrian flicked open the nightstand drawer and pulled out a handgun. His movements were fluid, practiced, the muscle memory of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Maybe 10,000. I stood frozen, rooted to the floor. You brought this on us. Adrian slammed a magazine into the grip. Perhaps. He glanced at the door, then back at me. But tonight, they're coming for you. A chill raced down my spine. What? Another explosion, closer this time. The walls groaned. Adrian lunged forward, grabbing my wrist in a crushing grip. Lena. His gaze turned predatory. This isn't a game. He dragged me into the hallway. Chaos had overtaken the mansion. Guards sprinted past, weapons drawn. A voice crackled over a radio. West perimeter breached. Adrian hissed a curse under his breath. He pulled me toward the grand staircase. Gunfire erupted from outside, sharp, rhythmic cracks. Glass shattered somewhere below. A guard crumpled at the end of the hall, blood blooming across the marble floor. I'd never seen anything like it. Not in real life. Not this close. Adrian shoved me against the wall, shielding me with his body. Stay behind me. I let out a harsh, jagged laugh. In the middle of the carnage, my reaction felt borderline psychotic. You think I'm going to start listening to you now? Adrian whirled on me, his eyes darkening to obsidian. Do you want to die? No. Then shut up. He pulled me low. A bullet whistled through the air where my head had been a second ago, burying itself in the plaster. Dust rained down. Adrian didn't hesitate. He leaned out and fired twice. A man in tactical gear tumbled down the stairs. 2 more appeared instantly. Adrian kept firing. Precise. Merciless. 1 dropped. The other scrambled for cover behind a pillar. Adrian forced me down onto the floor. Don't move. The firefight intensified. The Volkov estate had been transformed into a goddamn war zone. How many? Adrian barked into his comms. At least 10. Could be more. Adrian ground his teeth. Get her to the panic room. Now. I'm not going anywhere, I snapped. He looked at me as if I'd just said the stupidest thing on earth. This isn't the time to prove you're brave. I'm not afraid. Adrian gave a grim, short laugh. You should be. He turned back to the hallway. Right then, an attacker lunged from a blind spot, his rifle leveled directly at my chest. I didn't even have time to scream. I only saw Adrian throw himself in front of me. He tackled me to the ground. Pop, pop. A searing heat sliced through the air. Adrian stiffened. I looked up at him. Blood. Bright, crimson blood was soaking through the shoulder of his black shirt. You're hit. It's nothing. His voice was strained, his muscles coiled tight with pain. He spun around and fired twice more. The attacker collapsed. Adrian exhaled, a ragged sound. The blood was spreading fast. I stared at the wound, a strange sensation twisting in my chest. This man, he just took a bullet for me. Adrian looked down at me, his face pale but composed. Are you okay? The question caught me off guard. I'm fine. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips. Good. Another blast shook the ground floor. Adrian's expression went cold again. They're inside. He stood up, swaying slightly. I grabbed his arm. You're bleeding out. Adrian looked down at my hand on his arm, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. It's a scratch. It's not a scratch, Adrian. He pulled away. Later, he said, his voice returning to that icy, professional tone. Survival first. He kept moving, dragging me with him. We reached the lower level. The air was thick with the acrid stench of cordite. 2 guards were in a standoff at the main entrance. Adrian raised his weapon. 3 shots. 2 men went down. The 3rd retreated into the night. A guard ran up to us. They're falling back. They're gone. Adrian kept his gun raised, eyes scanning the shadows for a few more seconds before finally lowering it. Silence rushed back in, punctuated only by heavy breathing and the groans of the wounded. He turned to me, his gaze softening by a fraction. Are you sure you're all right? I stared at his shoulder. The shirt was drenched, yet he stood tall, as if the lead in his body meant nothing. A guard approached. We've secured the perimeter. They've cleared out. Adrian nodded. Lock down the gates. Call the doctor, and find out which family sent them. Everyone moved instantly. No questions. No hesitation. His authority here was absolute. Finally, he looked back at me. You took a bullet for me, I whispered. Adrian shrugged, though the movement clearly cost him. Not exactly. What do you mean? He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low rumble. If you die, this war gets a lot uglier. I looked him in the eye. I don't believe that's the only reason. Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made my heart stutter. You're my wife. His voice was low, but possessed a terrifying certainty. No one touches what belongs to me. I should have been furious. I should have hated being called a possession. But strangely, I couldn't, because I'd just seen something I never thought possible. Adrian Volkov, the monster, the man I was supposed to hate. He almost died to save me. And for the first time, I wasn't sure what I felt when I looked at him anymore. Chapter 6. The Silent Truth. The clinical scent of antiseptics saturated the room. I stood by the window, staring out at the gardens behind the Volkov estate. The sun had risen, but the morning light couldn't wash away the wreckage of last night. The ambush, the gunfire, the blood soaking Adrian's shirt. The phantom ring of bullets still echoed in the chambers of my mind. Behind me, Adrian's private doctor was stitching the jagged wound in his shoulder. Adrian sat on a chair, shirt discarded, revealing the broad expanse of his shoulders and a map of old scars. So many scars. Long, jagged lines. Small, circular craters. Marks that looked like they were carved by a blade. I stared at them, not out of curiosity, but because of a sudden, sharp realization. Adrian Volkov wasn't a man who always won. He was simply a man who survived. Finished, the doctor announced, breaking the silence. You need to rest for a few days. Adrian pulled on a fresh shirt, his face an unreadable mask. Not happening. You lost a significant amount of blood, sir. I have plenty left. The doctor let out a weary sigh. At least try not to let the stitches pop. Adrian didn't bother to reply. The doctor packed his bag, pausing at the door to look at me. You should make him rest. I almost laughed. A dry, bitter sound. You think I have the power to make him do anything? The doctor merely shrugged and let himself out. The door clicked shut, leaving only the two of us. The atmosphere in the room thickened instantly, heavy with everything unsaid. Adrian stood and crossed to the bar. He poured himself a glass of neat whiskey. Took a slow, deliberate swallow. I crossed my arms. You shouldn't be drinking. Adrian arched a brow, a flicker of dark amusement in his eyes. Did the doctor put you on the payroll, sunshine? You were just shot. Not the first time. The casualness of it struck me dumb for a second. I looked at him, my gaze tracing the lines of his face. How many times? Adrian shrugged. I stopped counting. He set the glass down. You can go back to your room now. No. I stepped closer. Adrian's eyes locked onto mine. What do you want, Lena? I didn't blink. Answers. A heavy beat of silence passed between us. About what? My father. The air in the room shifted, turning cold and brittle. Adrian didn't speak right away. He just watched me. I pressed on. Did you kill him? The question hung in the air like a bullet mid-flight. Adrian exhaled slowly, turning away. I've already answered that. No. I stepped even closer, encroaching on his space. You dodged it. Adrian whirled back, his gaze darkening to obsidian. What do you want to hear? The truth. I gave you the truth. You said if you'd killed him, I'd be dead. That's a threat, Adrian. Not an answer. Adrian was silent for several seconds. Then he spoke, his voice low and measured. You're convinced I murdered your father? Yes. Why? Because that's what everyone says. Adrian let out a short, mirthless chuckle. A truly reliable source of information. I ground my teeth. Don't mock me. I'm not mocking you. He stepped toward me, closing the distance until we were only breaths apart. I'm just surprised. Surprised by what? That you're smarter than I gave you credit for. I narrowed my eyes. What is that supposed to mean? Adrian leaned in, his presence an overwhelming force. You believe I'm the man who ended your father's life. Yet, here you are, living under my roof. I didn't answer, because he was right. Adrian tilted his head, his eyes searching mine. You're not afraid of me. I am. No. He shook his head. You hate me, but you aren't afraid. I am afraid enough. A chill raced down my spine at the look he gave me. What are you trying to say, Adrian? He held my gaze, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. If I had killed your father. He paused, the weight of his words pressing against me. I would tell it to your face. I stared at him, torn between belief and doubt. You think I'd just accept that? I don't give a damn whether you accept it or not. He shrugged. I just don't make a habit of lying. I fell silent, searching his face for any flicker of a ruse. But Adrian Volkov was an impossible book to read. Finally, I whispered, then who killed him? Adrian turned away again. That is the million-dollar question. You know the answer. Maybe. What are you hiding? Adrian picked up his whiskey and took another sip. Then he looked at me, his gaze piercing. You aren't ready for that answer. I'm not a child, Adrian. No. He studied me for a long moment. But you're still living in the wrong story. I felt a flash of white-hot anger. You think you're some kind of hero? Adrian laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. No. I'm the villain in your story, Lena. He set the glass down with a definitive clack. Then he said something that left me speechless. But at least, his voice was a low, resonant rumble. I'm the villain keeping you alive. I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of his words. Adrian walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at me one last time. And Lena, I looked up. If I were truly the one who killed your father. A beat. You wouldn't be standing here to ask me about it. The door clicked shut. I was alone in the room, his words looping through my head like a haunting melody. A possibility I'd never dared to consider began to take root. A possibility that made everything 1,000 times more complicated. If Adrian Volkov didn't kill my father, then who did? And why? Did everyone want me to believe it was him? Chapter 7. Fire and Ice. 2 days after the hit, the Volkov estate had plunged into a silence so absolute it was eerie. It was too quiet, like the surface of the ocean right before a tsunami hits. The shattered glass had been replaced with the latest reinforced ballistic panes. The bloodstains on the white marble floors had been scrubbed clean, leaving not even a ghost of the night's carnage. New guards, stone-faced giants in black suits, were stationed at every corner. To the outside world, it looked as if the massacre had never happened. But I knew better. Something had shattered, and it wasn't a window. It was the boundary in my mind. The image of Adrian lunging in front of me, his body a wall of granite against the barrel of a gun, haunted my every breath. That bullet was meant to tear through my chest. Instead, it had buried itself in his shoulder. His blood had been spilled for me. That thought was a toxin. It was driving me insane. I didn't want to owe him. I didn't want to feel gratitude for a monster. But my traitorous heart was beating to a rhythm I could no longer control. That afternoon, the suffocation drove me down to the kitchen. I needed something cold. Ice, water, anything to douse the fire smoldering in my veins. "Where's Mr. Volkov?" I asked the butler, who was busy setting the silver for dinner. "In his study, ma'am." He requested not to be disturbed. That answer should have been a stop sign. Instead, it was an invitation. 10 minutes later, I found myself standing before the heavy oak doors. I didn't knock. I pushed them open. The room was saturated with the scent of expensive leather, sandalwood, and the distinct tang of power. Adrian stood silhouetted against the massive floor-to-ceiling window. The crimson glow of the sunset bled around his frame, making him look like a god of war rising from the ruins. His black dress shirt was unbuttoned at the top 3 pegs. His sleeves were rolled past his elbows, revealing corded muscle and the heavy veins of his forearms. He held a phone to his ear, his voice low, cold, and metallic. "No," he growled. "Tell him if I see his face in this city again, I'll bury him so deep even God won't find the body." He cut the call and turned. His gaze locked onto mine, sharp and lethal. "You're trespassing on my territory, Lena." "You didn't lock the door," I shot back, fighting to keep my voice steady. I crossed my arms, a defensive tell I knew he'd catch instantly. "You should be resting. The doctor said your wound." "The doctor talks too much." Adrian leaned back against the edge of his mahogany desk, his posture relaxed yet predatory. "Are you worried about me, sunshine? Or are you just afraid of losing your insurance policy?" "Don't flatter yourself," I said, taking a step forward, feeling the heat radiating from him. "If you die, I just have to go through the trouble of marrying another mobster. And who knows if the next guy will have your taste in scotch." A dark, half-smirk ghosted across his sculpted face. He set his glass of whiskey down, his eyes never leaving mine for a second. "I don't die that easily. Especially not when I haven't gotten what I wanted from you yet." I glanced down at his shoulder, where the black fabric bunched slightly over the bandages. "How is the wound?" "Damn, you actually are concerned." "I told you, I'm not. And I told you that you're a liar." He stepped toward me, slow, deliberate. Every stride he took made the space around me shrink. "Your pupils are dilating. Your pulse is erratic. You can't hide that from me, Lena. I've spent my life reading fear and desire." He stopped inches away. I could smell the whiskey, the lingering ghost of gunpowder, and his raw, masculine scent. It was overwhelming. "You should stay away from me." His voice was a low rumble now. "Before I do something we both can't walk back from." I tilted my chin up, meeting those bottomless dark eyes. My stubbornness flared. "We're married, Adrian. You bought me. Remember? You own this house, this room, and my life. That doesn't mean you have any idea what kind of man I am." "I don't want to know you. I just want to know, why? Why did you take that bullet? Why did you save me?" Adrian leaned down, his face hovering inches from my ear. His hot breath ghosted over the sensitive skin of my neck, sending an involuntary shiver racing down my spine. "Because you're an expensive toy," he whispered, his voice thick and gravelly. And I don't like anyone touching my things until I'm finished playing with them. You think I'm afraid of you? I challenged, my hand moving instinctively to his chest, feeling the heavy, powerful thud of his heart beneath the fabric. No. Adrian seized my wrist, his grip firm but not painful. He backed me up until my spine hit the cool mahogany of the desk. You aren't afraid enough. That's your problem. You look at the monster and think you can tame it. Then make me afraid, I panted, daring him with every ounce of my recklessness. Show me the real monster. Time seemed to suspend. Adrian didn't flinch. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a dark, primal hunger mixed with extreme possessiveness. He smiled, a dark, satisfied thing. You have no idea what you're begging for, Lena Carter. Suddenly, his hand came up, his thumb rasping over my lower lip, forcing it open. A jolt of electricity surged through me, pooling in the pit of my stomach. He pulled me closer, until I could feel every hard line of his body pressed against mine. I like women who bite, he murmured, his lips a breath away from mine. But remember this, I am a predator. And once I start eating, I don't stop until there's nothing left but bone. I shoved against his chest, trying to reclaim some air. You're far too arrogant, Volkov. I'm not one of your plastic dolls you play with for a night. Adrian took a small step back, but his gaze remained pinned on me. I know, that's why I haven't broken you yet. I smoothed my dress, clutching onto whatever pride I had left as I moved toward the door. But as my hand hit the knob, I paused. I turned back to look at the man standing in the shadows of power and sin. You know what the funniest part is? Adrian didn't answer. He just raised his whiskey glass, waiting. I hate you. I truly hate everything about you. I know, he said calmly. But that night, my voice dropped, nearly cracking. When I saw your blood on the floor for me, I realized I don't hate you as much as I want to. The room fell into a deafening silence. Adrian's expression shifted, the mockery vanished, replaced by something deeper, heavier, and infinitely more dangerous. He set the glass down and walked toward me with heavy, measured steps. He stopped right behind me, his body heat enveloping me like a cage. That is the most dangerous thing you've ever said, Lena. Why? I whispered to the wood of the door. Because, he slammed his hand against the door right next to my head, boxing me in completely. If you stop hating me, you'll start loving me. And love from a man like me isn't roses and white candles. It's chains. It's ruin. And once I've touched you with this kind of obsession. He leaned down, his kiss grazing the shell of my ear, cold yet searing. I'm never letting you go. Even if you beg for death. I didn't ask him what he wouldn't stop. Because in the violent trembling of my own body, I already had the answer. I had walked into the lion's den, and instead of fleeing, I was inviting the beast to devour me. Chapter 8. The night everything shifted. The storm broke just before midnight. I lay in bed, listening to the wind clawing at the ballistic glass. Outside, tree branches lashed against the stone walls of the Volkov estate like whipcord. Thunder rolled in from the distance, a low, guttural growl that shook the foundation. Lightning fractured the sky. The strobing flashes cut through the curtains like jagged white blades. I've always hated storms. Ever since I was a child, these nights felt like a countdown to something ruinous. My father used to say it was just nature exhaling, but to me, it felt like the world was grinding its teeth. The restlessness pushed me out of bed. I paced toward the balcony doors, watching the garden vanish under a shroud of black rain. Another crack of lightning split the dark, and then, silence. The entire estate plunged into a void. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the air conditioning cut out, leaving only the roar of the wind. I froze. A heartbeat later, the heavy door behind me groaned open. I take it your power is out, too. Adrian's voice drifted from the shadows, smooth and cool as silk. I whirled around. He was a silhouette in the doorway, his features only sharpening when the lightning chose to reveal him. Where are the generators? I demanded, my heart hammering. Struck by lightning. A poetic inconvenience. Adrian stepped into the room. A lighter flickered to life in his hand, the small flame illuminating the harsh, beautiful angles of his face. His eyes were pits of obsidian. It'll only be a few hours, he said. I'm not afraid of the dark. I know. He stepped closer, the candlelight he'd just lit dancing in his gaze. But you're standing much further from the window than you were a minute ago. I didn't answer. I crossed my arms, shielding myself from the sudden drop in temperature, or perhaps from the intensity of his stare. Adrian set several candles on the table, their golden glow stretching our shadows against the walls until they merged into one. I sank onto the sofa. Adrian remained by the window, a sentinel in the dark. The men from the attack. I started, my voice barely a whisper over the rain. We're hunting them, he replied without turning. Do you know who sent them? I have theories. And? Adrian turned then, his gaze heavy. Do you truly want to know, Lena? Or are you just looking for a reason to hate me more? I live here. My life is on the line. Exactly. He nodded slowly. And that is precisely why you shouldn't know. Knowledge in my world isn't power. It's a target. I exhaled a jagged breath. You always do this. You keep everyone at arm's length. Adrian let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Secrets keep people alive. Trust gets them buried. Don't you trust anyone, Adrian? He paused, the flickering light casting half his face in shadow. I trust myself. It's the only alliance that hasn't betrayed me. How lonely, I mocked, though my chest tightened. Better lonely than dead. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, catching the pale, jagged scar on his neck. I'd never noticed it before, a thin, silver line that disappeared under his collar. Where did that come from? Adrian's hand drifted to his throat. This? A relic of a past life. Who did it? An old friend. And I assume you killed him? Adrian looked back at the storm, his jaw tightening. I tried. You tried? The great Adrian Volkov failed? He turned on me, his eyes darkening with a sudden, sharp heat. I didn't fail. I chose to let him live. Because for some people, death is far too merciful. I stared at him, seeing a flash of something raw beneath the armor. Not rage, not coldness, but a memory so agonizing it burned. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the mask snapped back into place. You should sleep, he said, dismissing the moment. I can't. Because of the storm? I told you, no. Adrian watched me for a long beat. He reached out and snuffed 2 of the candles, leaving the room in a hazy, amber twilight. He sat in the chair opposite me, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. You still hate me, he stated. Yes, but not as much as you did when you walked down that aisle. I stayed silent. I couldn't lie. Not when he was looking at me like he could see through my skin. I can feel it, Lena. The air changes when I walk in. You don't recoil anymore. You wait. I don't know what you're talking about. You're here, in the dark, with me. He stood up, closing the distance between us with predatory grace. You could have gone to any other room. You came here because you didn't want to be alone. The air between us grew thick, charged with the same electricity screaming through the sky outside. Adrian leaned down, his face inches from mine. You hate me, he whispered, his voice a gravelly caress. You don't trust me. And yet, he leaned in closer, his scent, expensive tobacco and cold rain, filling my senses. And yet, you're still here, waiting for me to touch you. My heart was thudding so hard I was certain he could feel it vibrating through the air. Don't misinterpret my presence, Adrian. I'm not. You think I want this? You think I want you? He smiled, a slow, devastating curve of his lips. I don't think. I know. I see the way your pulse jumps in your throat when I get too close. I see the way you fight the urge to scream my name. You're delusional. Am I? His voice dropped to a lethal, seductive rasp. Because if I start this, Lena, if I lay a hand on you, I am not stopping. Not tonight. Not ever. The heat in the room surged. My breath hitched. I should have pushed him away. I should have fled into the hallway. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, my body betraying every vow I'd made to my father's memory. Adrian reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. It was a light touch, but it felt like a brand. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over mine, agonizingly close but not touching. 1 second. 2. 3. The tension was a wire pulled to the breaking point. Adrian's eyes searched mine, looking for the no that never came. If I start, he whispered against my mouth, I won't stop. I swallowed hard, my voice a broken thread. Then don't start. Adrian stared at me for one more agonizing heartbeat, his pupils blown wide with a hunger that terrified me. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, he pulled back. The sudden distance felt like a physical blow. The air in the room turned freezing. He turned his back on me, walking toward the door without looking back. "Go to sleep, sunshine," he said, his voice back to its icy, untouchable self. "The night is dangerous enough as it is." The door clicked shut behind him. I sat alone in the flickering candlelight, my skin still tingling where he'd touched me. I knew the truth now. If Adrian Volkov hadn't stopped at that moment, I wouldn't have wanted him to.
The tension is electric. Who do you think sent the hit? Drop your theories below and smash that LIKE button for the next chapter. You are listening to Velvet Audio Stories, a brain-hacking IQ challenge.
9. The Devil's Touch. By the next morning, the storm had vanished. The sky was a piercing blue, as if the chaos of the previous night had never happened. But I knew better. Things had shifted. I stood before the bedroom mirror, my fingers lightly tracing my lips. The moment kept replaying in my head, Adrian leaning down, his mouth inches from mine. His breath, his gaze, and the way he stopped. He could have kissed me. I knew it, but he didn't. I didn't know why that bothered me more than if he actually had. I threw on a light jacket and headed downstairs. The breakfast room was vast and silent, the sunlight pouring over the polished surfaces. The butler was busy setting the table. "Where is Mr. Volkov?" I asked. "In the gym, ma'am." I blinked, surprised. "He's working out? After being shot?" The butler offered a polite, knowing smile. He's not a man who takes well to idleness. I didn't know why I found myself walking toward the gym. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I just wanted to make sure he hadn't dropped dead from an infection. I pushed open the gym doors. The first thing I heard was the rhythmic, heavy thud of a punching bag being pulverized. One hit, then another. I stepped inside. Adrian stood in the center of the room, wearing a fitted black compression shirt that left nothing to the imagination. Sweat made his hair cling to his forehead in dark tangles. He struck the bag with a force that made the heavy chains groan and rattle. Every punch was fast, precise, and lethal. The muscles in his back coiled and flexed with every movement. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds, caught in the sight. Adrian stopped. He didn't turn around. "Have you seen enough?" I jumped, startled. "Do you have eyes in the back of your head?" He turned then, sweat glistening along his temples and dripping down his neck. "You breathe too loud." "I do not breathe loud. For someone trying to sneak a peek, you do." I crossed my arms, defensive. I wasn't sneaking anything. Adrian arched a brow. "No, I was just checking to see if you were dead yet." A faint, dangerous smirk touched his lips. "Disappointed?" "I just didn't want the cops showing up at the door to collect a body." Adrian walked over to a bench and grabbed a towel to wipe his face. "You should worry more about yourself." "I worry about myself plenty." "I don't think you do." He started walking toward me. The distance between us began to vanish. I realized something then. Adrian Volkov, fresh from a workout, looked even more dangerous. And more magnetic. I hated myself for noticing. "How is your shoulder?" I asked as he stopped in front of me. He rotated it slightly. "Functional. I thought the doctor told you to rest." "Doctors don't live in my world, Lena." "You always say that, because it's always true." He was standing close now. Close enough that I could smell the salt of his sweat and the clean scent of his soap. It was a heady, masculine mix. "Is that the only reason you came down here? To play nurse?" I faltered. I didn't have a good answer. Adrian tilted his head, his dark eyes searching mine. "I'm guessing you're thinking about last night." "I'm not. You're a terrible liar." I looked up at him, my heart starting to race. "Why did you stop?" Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he threw the question back at me. "Stop what?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about." A long silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Adrian took another step. The space between us was gone. "Did you want me not to stop?" His voice dropped to a low, rough vibrato. I swallowed hard. "No. Are you sure about that?" "I'm sure." Adrian watched me for a long beat. Then, he spoke slowly. "Because if I start," he reached out, his fingers brushing against the pulse point on my wrist. "I won't stop." The touch was light, but a jolt of pure electricity surged through me, making me shiver. I loathed how my body betrayed me. I pulled my hand away. "You're far too arrogant." Adrian let out a low chuckle. "It isn't arrogance. Then what is it?" "Observational skills. I am not one of your women, Adrian. No, he said, his voice dropping an octave. You aren't. Good. You're my wife. Those 3 words changed the air in the room. I stared at him. It's just a piece of paper. Adrian stepped into my space, looming over me. No, it's a vow. I didn't vow anything to you. And yet, you're still here. I opened my mouth to snap back, but Adrian's hand was already moving. His fingers caught my chin. It was a light touch, but it was absolute. He tilted my face up, forcing me to meet his obsidian gaze. You hate me, he murmured. Yes. You don't trust me. I don't, but you still look at me like that. My heart was thudding so hard I was sure he could feel it through the floor. I don't. Adrian leaned down. His lips were inches from mine again. His breath was warm against my skin. You should be careful, sunshine, he whispered. Because I am not a good man. I looked at him, my voice a mere breath. You've said that before, and yet you still don't believe me. 1 second. 2. 3. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a blade. Adrian looked at my lips, then back to my eyes. Then, he pulled back. 1 step, 2 steps. The distance returned. He turned his back on me and grabbed a bottle of water. Workout's over, he said, as if the last minute had never happened. I stood there, paralyzed, trying to force my heart to slow down. Before I could turn to leave, Adrian spoke one last time. Lena. I looked back. He was watching me with eyes that were dark and hungry. If you keep looking at me like that. A pause. One of these days, I'm going to stop stopping. I didn't know how to answer. Because in that brief, terrifying moment, I realized the most frightening thing of all. I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop. Chapter 10. Secrets in the Shadows. I was starting to notice something strange. Adrian Volkov almost never slept. Or at least, I'd never seen him do it. 3 days after the siege on the estate, I woke up just before 3 a.m. It wasn't a nightmare that pulled me from sleep this time, but a sound, a faint, rhythmic click of a door at the far end of the hallway. I lay still, listening. The footsteps were heavy, steady, and familiar. Adrian, for reasons I couldn't explain, I slipped out of bed. I eased my door open, moving like a ghost. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows, illuminated only by a few dim sconces. At the far end, I caught a glimpse of him descending the stairs. No guards, no phone in hand, just him, moving through his fortress in silence. I stood there for a beat. A voice in my head told me to go back to bed. I didn't want to be entangled in his world. But curiosity is a persistent bitch, and it won. I followed him. I kept enough distance so he wouldn't hear me as he moved through the living room and turned into the west wing, a part of the mansion I'd never explored. He opened a door at the end of a long corridor and stepped inside. I stood before that door for a few seconds, my heart drumming against my ribs. Then, I pushed it open. The room inside was dark, save for the blue light hum of several monitors. I stepped in and stopped dead. The wall in front of me was a mosaic of screens. Cameras. Dozens of them. But it wasn't the sheer number that made the blood drain from my face. It was what they were showing. City streets, cafes, a grocery store, a local park, places that were familiar, too familiar. I stepped closer, my pulse skyrocketing. These were places I visited. Constantly, but not recently. These clips were old. One monitor showed me sitting in a coffee shop 2 years ago. Another showed me in the university library. Another, me crossing a street, clutching my coat against the wind. A cold shiver raced down my spine. Someone had been watching me. For a very long time. You shouldn't be in here. Adrian's voice came from the darkness behind me. I whirled around. He was standing by the door, his eyes 2 dark voids. You're stalking me, I said. It wasn't a question. Adrian stepped into the room, his presence filling the small space. Is that how you interpret this? I gestured wildly at the screens. You have cameras everywhere I go. Not everywhere. I don't see the difference. Adrian walked to a console and tapped a key. One by one, the monitors flickered off, plunging the room into near total darkness. Only one screen remained lit, showing a grainy video of a dark alleyway. I looked at it, then back at him. What is this? He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the screen. 3 years ago, he finally said. I frowned. 3 years ago? What? You almost died. The air in the room turned to ice. What are you talking about? Adrian pointed at the screen. The video began to play. I saw myself entering that alley. It was night. I remembered that night. I had been taking a shortcut home. Then, 2 men appeared. They moved toward me with a predatory intent I hadn't fully realized at the time. In the video, I saw myself freeze. I looked terrified, and then, both men dropped, before they could even lay a finger on me. A figure emerged from the shadows. Fast, lethal. In a matter of seconds, both attackers were incapacitated on the pavement. I stared at the screen, breathless, because I knew exactly who that figure was. Adrian, you. I struggled to find the words. Adrian killed the feed. The room went black. Why? I whispered, the word barely catching in the air. Why did you do it? He looked at me, his gaze unshakable. Because they came for you. I didn't even know them. They knew you. A fresh wave of dread washed over me. How long? Adrian paused. 4 years. I couldn't believe it. You've been stalking me for 4 years? Protecting you. That's not protection. I stepped into his space, my voice rising. That's surveillance. That's an invasion. Adrian didn't flinch. You're still breathing, aren't you? I can take care of myself. No, he said, his voice hard as iron. You can't. I glared at him, anger boiling over. You think I'm weak? I think you have no idea what kind of world you were born into. Then tell me. Adrian went silent. A long, heavy pause. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Your father wasn't the man you think he was, Lena. I stiffened. Don't talk about him. It's the truth. I don't care. Adrian stepped closer, his eyes deep and dangerously dark. You should care, because the people hunting you now, they were your father's enemies first. I stood there, feeling the world tilt on its axis. No. Yes. My father wasn't. Why do you think they want you? Adrian cut me off. I didn't answer. I didn't have one. Adrian leaned in, his intensity overwhelming. I've spent 4 years keeping them away from you. 4 years standing between you and the people who want to tear you apart. Why? I told you. No. I looked him dead in the eye. You haven't told me the real reason. Adrian hesitated for a heartbeat. Then, he spoke, his voice dropping to a gravelly rasp. Because you're important. To who? The mob? The enemies? To a lot of people. What about to you? I don't know why I asked it. Maybe it was the darkness. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me. Adrian stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. You're important to me. The atmosphere in the room turned thick and suffocating. I searched his face, trying to decide if I was being played or protected. Finally, I whispered, this marriage, was it just another part of the protection? Adrian didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes gave him away. And for the first time, I began to understand. Maybe this marriage wasn't a trap. Maybe it was a shield. Chapter 11. The Betrayal. After that night, I couldn't look at Adrian Volkov the same way again. 4 years. For 4 years, he had been watching me. For 4 years, he had been guarding me against horrors I didn't even know existed. The thought made everything tangled. A chaotic mess of debt and desire. I used to think he was the enemy. A monster. A man I was forced to marry as a transaction for my safety. But if what he said was true, then this marriage was never a deal. It was a setup, a master plan I was never consulted on. And that ignited a fury in me hotter than anything I'd felt before. 3 days passed. Adrian was busier than usual, a ghost haunting his own halls. He was barely home, and the air in the estate was thick with a new kind of tension. Guards paced the perimeter with white-knuckled grips on their weapons. Something was coming, but as usual, I was kept in the dark. That evening, I passed by Adrian's study. The door was ajar. The lights were still on, casting a golden glow into the hallway. I stopped. I knew I shouldn't go in. But curiosity had always been my greatest sin. I stepped inside. The study was a mirror of the man himself, cold, precise, and devoid of anything unnecessary. A massive dark wood desk, a wall of books, and a safe embedded in the stone. I drifted toward the desk. A file lay there, splayed open. I scanned the room. Empty. I knew I should turn around and walk away, but my eyes caught a single word. Carter. My name, my father's name. I snatched the folder. Inside were dozens of pages, contracts, surveillance photos, reports. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flipped through them. Then, I hit the page that made the world stop spinning. A report, dated 4 years ago, the night my father died. I read every line, the words searing into my retinas like acid. Execution order approved. Approved by Adrian Volkov. I stood there, paralyzed. No, it couldn't be. I read it again. His name was still there. That signature, bold, elegant, unmistakable. The room began to tilt. I backed away, clutching the paper. Every word out of his mouth. Everything he'd done. It was all a lie. He wasn't my protector. He was the man who had destroyed my life. The door behind me swung open. "What are you doing in here?" Adrian's voice hit me like a physical blow. I whirled around. He stood in the doorway, his eyes immediately dropping to the folder in my shaking hands. 1 second. 2. The air in the room turned to lead. "Put it down," he said. His voice was low, vibrating with a lethal edge. I let out a harsh, jagged laugh. "You killed my father." Adrian didn't answer immediately. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I shoved the folder toward him. "Execution order approved." I read it, Adrian. Every goddamn word. "Signed by you." A long, deafening silence followed. Adrian stepped into the room, his movements slow and measured, like a predator cornering prey. "Give it to me." "Why? So you can burn the evidence?" "Because you don't have the whole story." "I've seen enough." "You haven't seen anything," he growled. "No." I looked him dead in the eye, my voice trembling with rage. "You lied to me. You looked me in the face and said you didn't kill him." Adrian stopped inches away from me. "I didn't. This document says otherwise." Adrian looked at the file, then back at me. "Do you think everything in this world is that black and white, Lena? Don't try to explain your way out of this. I'm trying to save you from a truth you aren't ready for." "Don't." My voice broke. I was actually starting to believe in you. That hit him. I saw a flash of something raw and pained flicker in his obsidian eyes, but I didn't care. I slammed the folder onto the desk. "This marriage is over." Adrian let out a soft, dark chuckle. "You think you can just walk away?" "I am walking away." "No." His voice dropped to a gravelly rasp. "You aren't. I don't belong to you, Adrian." He stepped into my space, his presence overwhelming. "You are my wife." "Not anymore." I backed away, my heart thudding. "Stay away from me." Adrian stopped. His eyes went dark, reflecting a brewing storm. "You're making a mistake." The only mistake I made was trusting a devil. Silence stretched between us, brittle and cold. Then Adrian spoke, his voice hauntingly quiet. "If you leave this estate, I can't protect you. I don't want your protection. I'd rather take my chances with the rest of the world." I turned and bolted for the door. Adrian didn't grab me. He didn't try to pin me down. But as I passed him, his voice caught me like a snare. "You'll come back to me, Lena." I didn't answer. I ran out of the room, down the grand staircase, and out the front door. A car was waiting at the gates. I didn't know whose it was, and I didn't care. I just needed to be gone. As the car sped away from the Volkov estate, I refused to look back. Because I knew if I did, I would see him standing there. And I wasn't sure I was strong enough to leave a second time. Inside the study, Adrian stood motionless. A guard stepped in, his face pale. "Mr. Volkov." Adrian raised a hand, silencing him instantly. A long, heavy pause followed. Then, he spoke a single command that made the room turn to ice. "Lock down every gate in the city." The guard nodded. "Yes, sir." Adrian stared out the window into the pitch-black night, his eyes dark with a terrifying obsession. "And find her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you have to." A pause. "Burn this entire city to the ground." His gaze turned glacial. "But bring my wife home." Chapter 12. The Hunter. The car sped through the city for nearly an hour. I had no destination. All I knew was that I needed to be gone, far away from the Volkov estate and the man who had turned my life into a graveyard. The city at night looked different than during the day. Familiar streets felt skeletal and cold, the neon signs reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement like jagged, artificial scars. I stared out the window, the image of that file burning behind my eyelids. Execution order approved. His name. His goddamn signature. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. I had been so stupid. I had started to believe in him. Believe that he was my shield, that maybe he wasn't the monster I'd branded him to be. But it was all a game. A meticulous setup where I was nothing more than a pawn. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked. I blinked, snapping out of the spiral. "Here, this is fine." The car pulled over in front of a small, nondescript hotel. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't flashy. It was perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. I paid the fare, stepped out, and watched the taillights fade into the midnight traffic. I stood there for a moment, the biting wind whipping my hair across my face. A sudden, cold prickle crawled up my spine. The feeling of being watched. I glanced back. The street was nearly empty. A few distant cars. No one on the sidewalk. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling lingered like a shadow. I walked inside. The lobby was cramped, smelling of stale cigarettes and cheap cleaner. A middle-aged man was hunched over his phone behind the counter. He looked up, his eyes tired. "Room? Yes. How many nights? I'm not sure yet." He nodded and slid a key across the counter. "Room 203. I took the key and climbed the narrow stairs. The hallway was dim, bathed in a sickly yellow light. I found my room, locked the door, and leaned against it, closing my eyes. For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of freedom. No Adrian, no stone-faced guards, no blood-stained secrets, just me, but the relief was a lie. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. Across the street, a black sedan was idling. No lights, just sitting there. I watched it for a few seconds, my breath hitching. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe it was a local. Then the doors opened. 2 men stepped out. They didn't look around. They didn't speak. They just stood under the street lamp and stared directly up at the building. My heart hammered against my ribs. I backed away from the window, my blood turning to slush. A memory flashed. The surveillance room, the photos, the people Adrian said were hunting me. "No," I whispered. I flicked off the lights, plunging the room into darkness. I peered out again. One of the men was on his phone, looking at the building as if confirming a target. They weren't here by accident. They were here for me. A knock sounded on the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, intentional. "Room 203, a man's voice called from the hallway. "Room service." I hadn't ordered room service. My heart was thudding so hard I was sure they could hear it through the wood. "I don't need anything." A beat of silence. Then, the voice turned glacial. "Ms. Carter." The blood drained from my face. They knew my name. The doorknob turned slowly. I backed away as the lock rattled. Then came a heavy blow. The frame groaned. Damn it. I looked around. There was no exit, only the window. I scrambled toward it and threw it open. Below was a narrow alleyway. It wasn't too high, maybe 15 feet. A drop I could survive. Another crash. The wood began to splinter. I climbed onto the sill, the cold wind biting at my skin. I looked down. 2 stories. If I was lucky, I'd walk away. If I wasn't, the door burst open behind me. I jumped. The ground slammed into my feet, a white-hot bolt of pain shooting up my legs. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I sprinted through the alley, dodging trash heaps and rusted crates. "There she is," a voice screamed behind me. I ran harder, my lungs burning. I veered around a corner, then another, but the footsteps behind me were relentless. They were fast. Too fast. A hand snatched the back of my coat, jerking me around. I swung a blind fist, connecting with someone's jaw. The man stumbled back, but the second one was already there. He seized my wrists, pitting them in a crushing grip. "Got you," he hissed, a jagged grin splitting his face. "The boss is going to be very happy." I thrashed, trying to kick, but he was too strong. Then, a gunshot. The man in front of me stiffened. His eyes went wide, reflecting a sudden, terrible clarity. Then he crumpled to the ground. The other man let go of me, spinning around as he drew his weapon. A figure stood at the mouth of the alley. The streetlight behind him turned him into a silhouette of pure shadow. But I didn't need to see his face. I knew the weight of his presence. I knew the way the air seemed to freeze around him. Adrian. He stepped into the light, his gun raised, his eyes colder than the winter night. The remaining man cursed and tried to fire, but Adrian was a ghost. Pop, pop, 2 shots. The man hit the ground before he could even scream. Silence returned, thick and heavy. Only the sound of my ragged breathing filled the alley. Adrian walked toward me, his gaze fixed on my face. 1 second. 2. I told you, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You'll come back to me. I stared at him, my heart still trying to hammer its way out of my chest. You were stalking me. No, Adrian said, his eyes darkening with a terrifying intensity. I was hunting you. I narrowed my eyes. What? He stepped closer, looming over me, the scent of expensive tobacco and cold rain surrounding me once again. You ran, he whispered, his voice vibrating with a dark, possessive heat. But you're still mine, Lena.
He calls her sunshine, but treats her like his obsession. Would you stay or run? Let us know in the comments. Don't miss the shocking revelation in the next part. You are listening to Velvet Audio Stories. Boost your IQ.
Chapter 13. The Truth. The alley fell into a haunting silence after the gunshots. 2 men lay motionless on the wet concrete. The acrid scent of gunpowder mingled with the stench of trash and stagnant rain. I stood there, lungs burning, heart hammering against my ribs like a caged animal. Adrian Volkov stood a few paces away. The gun was still steady in his hand, his gaze as cold as the Siberian winter. But the frost in his eyes wasn't for the dead men, it was for me. I told you, he said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble. You wouldn't survive out here. I looked at him, fury still searing my chest. You were stalking me. No. Adrian stepped closer, his presence expanding until it filled the narrow space. I was finding you, just like you've been doing for 4 years. A brief silence hung between us. He didn't blink. He didn't deny it. Yes. I let out a dry, jagged laugh. How romantic. Adrian narrowed his eyes. You think this is a game, Lena? No. I met his gaze head on, refusing to flinch. I think you're the man who murdered my father. The air between us turned to ice. Adrian stared at me for an eternity before letting out a slow, measured exhale. You still believe that? I saw the file, Adrian. Your signature. Your approval. You saw a fragment. It was enough. Adrian shook his head, a dark shadow crossing his face. It wasn't. I don't want to hear your excuses. You need to hear the truth. I don't, Lena. His voice cut through mine, sharp and commanding. Listen to me. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was the raw intensity in his eyes. Maybe I was just too exhausted to keep running. Adrian closed the distance between us, his movements deliberate. I approve that order, he said, his voice dropping an octave. I don't deny it. I gave him a chilling smile. Thanks for the honesty. At least I know I'm married to a cold-blooded killer. But I didn't kill him. Then who did? Adrian looked at me, a heavy silence stretching between us. Then, he uttered 2 words that made my entire world collapse. Your uncle. I froze. What? Your uncle, Lena. I shook my head, my mind rejecting the words. No, that's impossible. It's the reality you've been blind to. He took me in. He raised me after my father died. Because he needed you close. My pulse spiked. You're lying. Adrian stepped into my personal space, his eyes darkening with a terrifying focus. Why do you think those men were hunting you tonight? I didn't have an answer. It all leads back to your father, he said. And the legacy he left behind. My father was just a businessman. Adrian let out a dark, hollow chuckle. That's the fairy tale he fed you. You don't know anything about him. I know enough. Adrian pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and shoved it toward me. A photo flickered to life. My father. But he wasn't in his usual tailored suit. He was standing with 3 other men. One of them was my uncle. But the others sent a chill racing down my spine. I recognized them from the news, from the whispers of the underworld. The heads of the most brutal syndicates. Your father wasn't just a businessman, Lena, Adrian said, his voice cold and flat. He was their laundryman. He cleaned their blood money. I felt the strength leave my legs. No, he tried to get out, Adrian continued. He wanted to walk away from the game. And your uncle? He didn't like that. No. My voice broke. Adrian watched me, his expression unreadable. That night, your uncle was the one who signed his death warrant. I stood there, paralyzed. Every memory I held dear shattered into a million jagged pieces. The funeral, my uncle holding me, him whispering that the Volkovs had taken my father away. A lie, a 4-year-old, systematic lie. You knew this from the start? I whispered. Adrian nodded once. Then why didn't you tell me? You wouldn't have believed me. I might have. No, he said firmly. You needed an enemy, and I was the perfect choice. A long silence settled over the alley. The wind whistled through the buildings, chilling the sweat on my skin. I looked down at the 2 corpses. And these men? They work for your uncle. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. He wants to capture me? He wants what you have. I don't have anything. Adrian looked me dead in the eye, his gaze piercing through my soul. You have everything. What are you talking about? He stepped closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Your father left behind something people would burn the world down to possess. What? Adrian hesitated for a heartbeat. A list. What kind of list? A ledger of everyone your father worked with. The bosses. The politicians. The power brokers. Adrian's voice was a low rasp. And you're the only person who knows where it is. I shook my head, panic rising. I don't know. I swear. Not yet, Adrian said. But your uncle believes you do. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Then, I asked the only question left in my head. Why are you protecting me? Adrian's gaze shifted. The ice was gone, replaced by a dark, shimmering intensity. I told you already. Because I'm important? It's more than that. Then what is it? Adrian stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. Then, he said something that made my heart skip a beat. Because if you die, his voice dropped to a gravelly whisper. I'll never forgive myself. I looked at him, and something inside me finally snapped. All the hatred, all the certainty. It was gone. For the first time, I began to see. Adrian Volkov was never my enemy. He was the only thing standing between me and a shallow grave. Chapter 14. The War. The alleyway still reeked of gunpowder. 2 bodies lay twisted under the flicker of the streetlights. But Adrian wasn't looking at them anymore. His gaze was anchored on me, as if the rest of the world had simply ceased to exist. I'm taking you back, he said. I'm not going back to that estate. Tonight, you don't have a choice. His voice was calm, but I could hear the jagged edge beneath it. Tension. Danger. Why? Adrian didn't answer immediately. He scanned the mouth of the alley, his head tilted as if listening to the heartbeat of the city. Then, he said something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Because the war has begun. I furrowed my brow. What war? Adrian didn't explain. He simply grabbed my wrist, his grip firm and possessive. We have to move. Now. We had barely stepped out of the alley when a black SUV roared toward us, tires screeching to a halt. 2 of Adrian's guards jumped out. Mr. Volkov, get her home, locked down, high security. And you, sir? Adrian turned to me. His eyes were as dark as a brewing storm. I have things to settle. I understood instantly. No. Adrian's jaw tightened. You aren't coming with me, Lena. I'm not going back if you're going into this alone. A heavy silence followed. The guards looked between us, not daring to breathe. Adrian exhaled a rough, frustrated breath. You really want to be in the middle of this bloodbath? I'm already in it. There's no out. He stared at me for a few beats, searching my face. Then, he threw open the car door. Get in. The SUV tore through the night. The city ahead was a blur of neon and steel, but the atmosphere inside the car was suffocating. I need to know what's happening, I said. Adrian stared out the window. Your uncle. 2 words. That was all it took. He's attacking you? He thinks I'm holding you captive. That I'm the wall between him and your father's legacy. I'm right here. Exactly. Adrian turned to look at me, his gaze piercing. And that makes everything 1,000 times worse. The car swerved into an abandoned industrial zone, a graveyard of old warehouses and rusted machinery. Pale yellow lights flickered overhead. A fleet of black vehicles was already staged there. Adrian's men, dozens of them, all armed to the teeth. A towering man stepped forward. Mr. Volkov, we found them. Where? Warehouse 7. Adrian nodded, his expression turning to stone. Good. I looked around at the arsenal being readied. You're going to ambush them? Adrian looked at me. No, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal rasp. I'm going to end this. We entered the warehouse. The air was frigid, smelling of cold grease and old metal. A group of men stood on the opposite side, bathed in shadow. In the center of the pack stood my uncle. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a sick, calculating affection. Lena, he smiled. You look well, sweetheart. I said nothing. Adrian stepped in front of me, a human shield of muscle and fury. You sent men to kill my wife, Adrian growled. My uncle laughed. She isn't your wife, boy. She's a bargaining chip. She is mine. Adrian's voice dropped into a dangerous, guttural territory. My uncle turned his gaze to me. Do you really believe his lies, Lena? You killed my father, I spat. The smile vanished from his face. Is that what Volkov told you? You did it. Silence stretched, thin and brittle. Then, my uncle let out a dark, chilling chuckle. Yes, I did. My heart stopped. Why? I whispered. My brother was weak, he said, stepping into the light. He wanted to walk away from the throne. I just helped him find the exit. Adrian raised his weapon. Enough. But my uncle was faster. He raised his hand, a signal. Gunfire erupted. The warehouse transformed into a slaughterhouse. Bullets shredded the air, sparks flying off metal crates. Adrian's men returned fire. I was jerked down behind a heavy steel container. Adrian stood over me, unleashing a hail of lead. 3 men went down, but they were outnumbered. A stray bullet hissed through the air. Adrian winced, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. Blood bloomed across his chest, staining the dark fabric. Adrian, he stumbled back, his breath catching, then collapsed to his knees. Everything seemed to slow down. The roar of the guns faded into a dull hum. I scrambled toward him. Adrian, his blood was warm, slicking over my hands. He was struggling for air. You shouldn't be here, he wheezed. I'm not letting you die. Adrian looked at me, his strength fading, his eyes searching mine. Why? I didn't answer right away. Because for the first time, I understood the thing I feared most. I leaned down, my lips close to his ear, and whispered, because I can't lose you. Adrian's eyes widened, a spark of life returning to them. Another bullet whizzed past. I reached down, grabbed his discarded handgun, and spun around. I didn't think. I just fired. The man charging us dropped instantly. I stood over Adrian, shielding him just as he had always shielded me. One of the guards screamed, "They're retreating. Move out." The warehouse fell into a heavy, ringing silence. Only the sound of our breathing remained. I knelt back down beside Adrian. Stay with me. Wake up. He looked up at me, a weak, blood-stained smile tugging at his lips. You came back. Shut up, I snapped, my eyes stinging. You don't get to die yet. Adrian watched me, his voice a ghost of a whisper. You are mine. I squeezed his hand, and for the first time, I didn't pull away. Chapter 15, The Devil Crumbles. The scent of blood saturated the warehouse. The smoke from the gunfire still hung in the air like a ghostly fog. I could hear the rhythmic thud of the guards' boots as they cleared the floor, checking the bodies of those who had fallen. But I heard none of it. My world had shrunk down to the man in my arms. Adrian lay on the cold concrete. His black shirt was soaked through, the blood pooling beneath him on the gray floor. Adrian, look at me. I cupped his face. His eyes were glazed, the pupils blown wide. But the moment his gaze found mine, the corner of his mouth twitched. A ghost of a smile. You're still here. Shut up, I snapped. My voice was trembling, brittle as glass. I didn't give you permission to speak. A guard sprinted over. The car is ready. Where is the doctor? I screamed. Waiting at the estate. Then get him in the car. Now. 2 men hoisted Adrian up with practiced efficiency. I scrambled into the back of the SUV with them. The vehicle tore through the night, a silent bullet racing against death. I held his hand the entire way. His blood felt hot and sticky, staining my skin, marking me. He forced his eyes open one more time. Lena, don't. Save your breath. I don't want you seeing me like this. I squeezed his hand, my knuckles white. You've seen me at my weakest plenty of times. It's my turn. Adrian let out a pained, wheezing chuckle. No, he whispered. You were never weak. The SUV lurched to a halt in front of the mansion. A medical team was already waiting. They whisked him away on a gurney, the sterile white of the hallway swallowing him up. The doors to the operating room slammed shut. I stood in the corridor. The blood on my hands had begun to dry, turning a dark, rust brown. I couldn't bring myself to wash it off. It felt like the only thing keeping me connected to him. 3 hours passed. The silence was deafening. Guards lined the walls like statues, but not a single one dared to meet my eyes. Finally, the doors creaked open. The lead surgeon stepped out, pulling down his mask. "How is he?" I demanded, moving before he could even speak. "He's stable. He's out of the woods for now." My legs nearly gave out. I had to catch myself against the wall. "Can I see him? He hasn't regained consciousness yet." "I don't care. I'm going in." The doctor nodded. I pushed past him and entered the room. Adrian looked smaller in the hospital bed, surrounded by the hum and beep of monitors. His chest was heavily bandaged. This was the first time I had ever seen Adrian Volkov. Quiet. No predatory gaze. No lethal smirk. Just a man who had almost died for me. I pulled a chair to his bedside. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, maybe more, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. Finally, he stirred. His eyelids fluttered open. He stared at the ceiling for a long beat before slowly turning his head toward me. "You're still here." His voice was a dry, sandpaper rasp. "I told you," I said, trying to regain my edge. "You don't have permission to die." Adrian watched me. His gaze was softer now, vulnerable in a way that felt more real than anything I'd ever known. "You should leave." "Why?" "Because." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I don't want you to see me like this." I narrowed my eyes. "Like what?" "Broken." I let out a soft, breathy laugh. "You think I haven't seen you break before?" Adrian remained silent. That night, I whispered, leaning in closer. "You took a bullet for me. You've bled for me. You think I care about your pride right now?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than ironclad confidence in his eyes. "Why, Adrian? Why do you do it?" He stared at me for an eternity. Then, he said something I never thought would cross the lips of a man like him. "I'm afraid." I froze. "Of what?" His voice was barely a whisper, thick with an emotion he clearly hated admitting. "Of losing you." The air in the room turned heavy, suffocatingly intimate. Adrian turned his head away, staring into the shadows of the room. "I can control this entire city," he said slowly. "I can make anyone vanish with a snap of my fingers. I own the streets, the politicians, the laws." He took a ragged breath. "But I can't live if I lose you." My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. This wasn't the Adrian Volkov the world feared. This was a man, crumbling. And he was doing it for me. I reached out and took his hand. For the first time, I didn't want to let go. Chapter 16. Mine. The Volkov estate had never been as quiet as it was that night. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the stifling silence that precedes a hurricane. I stood by the window in Adrian's room, watching the city lights bleed across the horizon. 4 days had passed since the warehouse slaughter. Adrian was alive, but life didn't mean the nightmare was over. My uncle was still breathing, and a man like him didn't know how to stop. Behind me, I heard the rustle of fabric. Adrian was putting on his coat. The wound on his chest was far from healed, but he was already out of bed, his movements stiff but determined. "You shouldn't be going out," I said, not turning around. Adrian buttoned his shirt with steady fingers. "I don't have a choice." "I do." He stopped and looked at me. "You aren't a part of this, Lena. I've been a part of this since before I knew your name." Adrian stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "Lena, I'm not the fragile girl you think I am, Adrian. Not anymore. I know that. Then let me go with you." Adrian searched my face for a long, agonizing moment. Finally, he let out a jagged exhale. "Fine." An hour later, we stood before an old, weathered villa on the outskirts of the city, my uncle's final bolt hole. Adrian's car sat idling in the shadows, his guards positioned behind us, waiting for the word. Adrian looked at me, his hand on the door handle. "Stay in the car. I told you, Lena." His voice dropped, thick with a sudden, protective heat. "I am not letting you die tonight. And I'm not letting you die either." Silence stretched between us. Then, Adrian threw open the door. "Let's go." We entered the villa. The front door was unlatched, an invitation into the lion's den. The foyer was draped in darkness, save for a single desk lamp glowing in the living room. My uncle sat on the sofa, calmly pouring a glass of scotch. He looked up as we crossed the threshold. "I knew you'd come." His eyes flickered to Adrian. "And you, too." Adrian didn't say a word. He stood in the center of the room, his gun drawn and steady. I'm here to end this. My uncle chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. You think you've won, boy? You've lost your men. You have nothing left. I still have my niece. His gaze shifted to me, sharp and predatory. Lena, you murdered my father, I spat, the words tasting like venom. The smirk vanished from his face. He was weak. I'm going to kill you, Adrian growled, raising his weapon. But my uncle was faster. He whipped a pistol from beneath the table and leveled it directly at my heart. Drop it. Adrian didn't move. His jaw was set, his eyes burning. Now, my uncle barked. I looked at Adrian. I saw the flash of pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. Slowly, he let his gun clatter to the hardwood floor. My uncle grinned. Smart man. He stood up, keeping the barrel trained on my chest. You know, Lena, your father always thought he was better than the rest of us. I'm nothing like you, I whispered. You're more like him than you think. A shot rang out. It didn't come from my uncle. It came from me. I held Adrian's spare piece, my grip firm. My uncle looked down at his chest, watching the red bloom across his white shirt with a look of utter shock. He looked back at me, his mouth working but no sound coming out. Why? I stared him down, my voice cold and final. Because I choose to. He hit the floor with a heavy thud. The room fell into a deafening silence. Adrian looked at me, his expression a mix of shock and something bordering on awe. You. I lowered the gun. He killed my father. It was my debt to pay. Adrian stepped over the body and came to me. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek with a lightness that made me shiver. Are you okay? I don't know. You just ended a war, sunshine. I think this war started a long time ago. Adrian let out a breathy, dark laugh. He pulled me into him, crushing me against his chest. This time, I didn't fight. I didn't run. I just stayed there, anchored in his arms. He looked down at me, his gaze softer than I had ever seen it. Do you still hate me? A small, tired smile touched my lips. Yes. A beat of silence passed. I placed my hand over his heart, right over the bandages. But I love you more. Adrian stared at me, his pupils dilating as he processed the words.
If you loved this journey,
Then,
subscribe and turn on notifications
time,
for our
he didn't
next
stop.
Dark Romance series.